now rocking with TDF everything. Spoiled rotten.
Spoiler alert.
Welcome and welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
It's me, Daniel,
And this is Ben.
on Spoiled Rotten. And we're here to talk about Watchmen, not the movie, but the 2019 TV show from HBO.
Yeah.
Which is a sequel, again, not to the movie, but to the comics.
Yes.
Which I don't know if you knew going into it. I didn't want to say too much going into it because I got to experience it pretty clean.
Yep.
But yeah, I guess it doesn't require, but you definitely benefit if you have the comic fresh in your mind.
Sure. So I had heard in passing that it was a spiritual successor to the comics and all that kind of stuff. And I have never read the comic. I hope to at some point. I know I have the physical copy. I don't know where it is. But I do hope to read it at some point. Because of course we ripped apart the Snyder movie quite a bit. So I did know that it was a spiritual successor, but there was so much like Watchmen lore that I had forgotten about. Like the idea of Dr. Manhattan just wins the Vietnam War, which is famously not what happens in history. Even though you'll never hear them say that, but it is one of those things where I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, that's what happened there, and all this kind of stuff. I did not know that, and I will say that this is the first time I've ever watched it, and just for some reason, I know why I didn't watch it during the pandemic when I should have. But that's not something I'm going to talk about on mic. So, so this is the first run through for me. And wow, I famously have been like, I'm watching 1 or 2 episodes a night. And this was one of those things where I'm like, I want more. Immediately, I just want more.
It is. So the first time I watched it was when it was airing. So I was like listening to Damon Lindelof after every episode talk about the episode. And I was like so deep in it. It also, funnily enough, came right before like the 2020 summer of everyone being like, what do we think about cops? So we're going to reassess this.
Right.
Because obviously the whole thing, but the first half is really like heavy on like, hey, cops, did they just become like vigilantes or like superheroes that are masked and no one can trust them?
Yep.
So yeah, that was big for me, but also the big thing I famously like, someone who hadn't done a lot of looking back into its African American history, not African Canadian, but not fully getting until the end of the episode, like, oh, that thing that happened in the beginning of the episode is just real. Like that, the Tulsa really happened. Rosewood really happened. I knew Rosewood really happened. The Tulsa Black Wall Street thing, I was like, oh, I just thought that was like a thing people made up, but this is real. So it's very interesting. Certain elements of the show that they're like, no, this just really happened. Unlike and Dr. Manhattan won the war for us, and then Vietnam became the 51st state. Like, there's just things that they're putting in there. They're like, this just genuinely happened, including Will Reeves, obviously not Will Reeves, but Donald Trump's dad being arrested for being anti-Semitic and like trying to, and because I was like, did I remember this wrong? I'm like, no, they're calling him Fred. He is Fred Trump. Like they're not giving the last name, but they're showing you like, oh no, Donald Trump comes by this honestly.
Yep.
Yeah, there's just so many cool things, and then there are so many like Superman parallels. So not real life stuff, but if you're like into DC comics, like I felt like there was like 3 instances where you were like, are they doing Superman right now? And then they genuinely just have the Superman comics in it at one point. But yeah, I find that it's a show that you can dig a lot into and get a lot of things out of. I think for me this time around, I really tapped into the generational trauma
Yes.
and the I know for a fact that Damon Lindelof made a point of having black writers in there, so the how generational trauma works for black people in particular is present.
Mhm.
And fortunately you have someone like Hong Chow from Vietnam who can help, but they didn't have like Vietnamese writers, and Damon Lindelof said that is something he wished he pushed for, but he leaned heavily on Hong Chow to carve a space for her experience and
Mhm.
made sure she was like, I'm not gonna be like, this is the experience. So her character is
Mhm.
in there, but I can see a different form of generational trauma through like her relationship with her mom.
Yep.
Um and then by the end of it you get, or at least for me it was very clear, like there's like the white experience of generational trauma. And I mean, I guess they're showing you with Fred Trump as well, just like what gets passed on and how it gets passed on and why it's being passed on.
Mhm. Mhm. This is one of those instances where I'm like, after I remembered, oh yeah, Dr. Manhattan did this and they rewrote history like that, right? Um, I was very impressed with that Tulsa scene because I did know that that Tulsa thing happened. I was impressed by the fact that the writers did not want to change that at all, and they just inserted the origin of the character in
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. And I'm like, that's really good. That's a lot of respect there because in the situation of the Vietnam War with Hong Chow and all that kind of stuff,
Well,
I'm not
I think she wasn't going to speak to the Vietnamese War. I think she was just
right.
speaking about
The Vietnamese
Vietnamese
experience.
in the States.
Sure. One of the biggest things that is very, very challenging there. I'm like, okay, well, Vietnam definitely won that war. And it doesn't feel like they won the war because of how America gaslights the world into
Mm-hmm.
the way. And then when I went to Vietnam and all that kind of stuff, it's not it doesn't feel like they won at all in the sense where in to the degree of what they show in the episode where they're like actually in Vietnam post-war and all that little small set piece where they're very much like not anti-American, but they're just like, well, whatever.
I find them to
We
be,
don't
and
care.
I'm saying this as a good thing,
Mhm.
I find them to be anti-American. Like
Sure.
in general, like not in general, that's not the word I want to use, but to specifically name the museum the war crimes of America. To like,
That's true.
I think that doesn't mean that you walk around and feel like, oh, I better let them know I'm not American, because I didn't
Mhm.
really feel that as a Canadian. They liked me much either.
Right.
It's just you can't use that currency there of like, I'm an American or I'm
Mhm.
a Canadian. You just got to respect to that you have to meet them at their level and can't try and yank them into like the Western imperialism thing.
Yeah, because when I was there, obviously me being Asian, they obviously didn't care. Like they didn't look
Hmm.
at me twice, right? But the Americans that I did meet there, they were very, very much like, we're from Canada. And I'm like, person I was traveling with, Tim, we were like, well, yeah, where are you from? I'm like, Toronto. I'm like, which part?
Yeah, no one
And
ever
it's just
gets
like,
it right. They're
they
like,
never get it
I'm from
right.
Mississauga.
I am sure now they'll get it right because of Drake. But at the end of the day, you could still continue to ask questions further, distilling. It's like, oh yeah, do you like the Metro there or the Loblaws or what? You'll get to those questions. And it's like, gotcha. What was it? No, Foodland doesn't exist anymore. It's whatever. And I'm just like, haha, got you, you American. He's American. Get him.
um, yeah, but I think the other thing they changed obviously is instead of having uh, what's his name now, Reagan be the president, like he or
Hmm.
still the president is it's
Robert Redford.
Robert Redford has
Yeah.
taken over as president and given Redfordations, they call them, to black people, which I guess they're like, well, we already subjugated another class, like not another class of people, another group of people with the Vietnamese. So I guess we could throw these black people a bone.
Hmm.
And you're just like, yeah, I think what is great about the setup of the show is, um, they get to it by the last episode when they talk about the hate that comes from like fear and
Mm-hmm.
hurt as opposed to people thinking it's just from anger.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, really setting up the idea, and that's more of a slow burn of what we've talked about in the past as well. Like, oh, don't just think you're gonna join the police and change things. Like, there's people that are truly committed to things working the way they're working.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that with the villains by the end when they're like, just kill us. No, like, we don't want to hear your stupid ass story about
Mm-hmm.
why you did this, or like, it doesn't matter. Just kill us. We
Yeah.
would rather die than actually take you seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. It's oh man, by the end of it, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is just everyone just full on admitting this and they're owning it. And I'm like, okay,
That's what I
that's
loved.
that is
The
great.
villains were like, "Oh, like was I supposed to keep pretending?" Like, no.
Yeah, yeah, like that scene where God, what's her face? And I do love this actress. Frances Fisher's character, Jane Crawford. She like when she was getting interrogated by the Silk Spectre actress Jean
Yeah, Jean
Smart,
Smart. When like
Laurie
that's the
Blake.
comedian's daughter, which I think
Yeah.
she did a great job of. Really, she's using his last name in this, so it's like she's really pulling in all the like comedian stuff for this
Yeah.
performance.
Yeah, absolutely. She is doing she just full on admits it. It's like, hey, we found this thing, and she's not even shocked at all. And like
Yeah, she's like,
I
"Oh no, like that was the plan," and then we realize president is so small potatoes. So, and
yeah.
then she's like, "Wait, what?" And I love that up until that point, Jean Smart's character is so ahead of everybody else,
Hmm.
and she's just not prepared for someone who's like, I don't I don't care. I'm miles ahead of you. Like,
Yeah.
this is already like this is gonna already happen. Funnily enough, they weren't miles ahead of her, but it's just that
Hmm.
the confidence that she had when she was like, even the fact that her like trick door didn't work. Like, I was like, I kept thinking like, you could leave, like you could get out of here, but she's so shocked that she wasn't ahead of this person that
Yeah.
like that was enough to keep her sitting there. Like, what do I do? I'm frozen. I'm frozen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, did this person just full on admit she's a racist and this is the plan and like all this kind of stuff? And and like I was shocked in that. And the reality of like the button trapdoor thing not working and still getting her, I'm like, yeah, okay, I would that's how I would respond to.
Yeah,
Because what can you do at that point in the sense where you're like, you came alone. All you're just shocked by how
yeah.
blatant that is. And that's the great thing about the villains in this, right? Not the great thing about white supremacy, but the great thing about the villains is like at a certain point they just drop the act and then they're like, yeah, we're racists, baby, and you slowly find out each individual reason, and I'm like, okay, well, you gots to go, and the show
Yeah.
does that in a really really satisfying way.
So the main character, I guess, the story of this season is Angela Abar.
Yeah.
Meets this man. I love everything to do with Will Reeves. Like, when by the time he's played by Louis Gossett Jr.
Mhm.
Because I was just the first time I just remember being like, what is this guy's deal? But rewatching it, knowing where things are going, I'm impressed with all of the different intricacies of people's performances. But
Mhm.
just the fact that he's like, I'm Dr. Manhattan, and you're like, he's not lying about being a Watchman.
Yeah.
Or I guess
A
in the comics they're
Minuteman.
Minutemen.
Yeah.
And then like, and when he's like, hey, you think I could lift 200 pounds? And I'm like, it's funny because even on the rewatch, I'm like, wait, it's because he's strong. Did he lift him? And then you realize he didn't even have to lift him. But it's just like, I like the idea that you're, even on the rewatch, there's certain lines that can mess with how you remember what's going on.
Mhm.
But yeah, she meets this man. Turns out it's her grandfather, but she has a ways to go before she realizes that, and he has set in set in motion a plan to have her know where she comes from, know
Mhm.
what his mistakes were, and to keep her family safe while he works with Dr. Manhattan to get rid of well, Dr. Manhattan and there's a guy named Miss
Zinda
True,
Myers or
like Hong Chow. Like he's
oh,
working with
Hong
Hong
Chao, yeah.
Chow to.
Yeah.
I can't remember the character name. I think she's just
Uh,
True.
I
It's
think
just
so. Yeah, true. Because it's her company's like True.
Yeah, but I feel
something.
like sometimes people call her like Miss Lady True. That's what it is.
Lady
Lady True.
Chu. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, he's working with these two entities
Hmm.
to make sure that he keeps uh his granddaughter safe. I
Hmm.
guess. I mean, not I guess. I know what he's trying to do, but I'm trying to thread a needle here. um,
Hmm.
um, yeah. So that is interesting. She grew up in Vietnam, as we said, as
Hmm.
it became the 51st state. But she says she was born there before it became a state, like a couple years before,
Right.
with her parents just being in the army.
Yeah. They definitely met during the war, and then
Yeah, with
Dr. Manhattan.
her dad being uh, the son of Will Reeves.
Yeah.
Um, and so in that you see, and this is why I said don't watch the animated movie that we're going to do next week,
Yep.
because I could see they cast a black person as Hooded Justice, and I'm like,
Hmm.
that's a big part of that's a big part of this, that
Hmm.
they've redone the comics so that Hooded Justice is black,
Hmm.
definitively black, because I feel like the comics, it's like we don't know who he is, but at no point are they suggesting he's black. It's just like, is he from the States, is he not from the States?
Hmm.
So I just was like, it'll be better experience if you watch this and then the one where they're just like, yeah, he's black.
I am very appreciative of that suggestion for sure. Because that was such good storytelling.
Yeah. So Will Reeves takes his name because he loved Bass Reeves,
Yeah.
something else. He loved Bass Reeves, and it's what's interesting about watching this now is there is a lot of online discussion about how black people are overrepresented in the military, and
Hmm.
um, just the discussions about what would force or what would motivate someone to be a part of a tool of their own oppression.
Hmm.
Um, and this show, again, it's came out in 2019, so it's not trying to address those things, but it's obviously still relevant, like
Yeah.
what it's addressing, and just him just thinking like, oh wow, like a hero. And so like when you're watching him in the movie theater with his mom playing along to the silent film, and white people actually respect this black person, he doesn't have to hide. I mean,
Hmm.
does have the hood, but in the movie he takes the hood off and everyone's like, it's Bass Reeves, that's great. Oh, like,
Yeah,
so
they're all
you just see
cheering
him
and
being like,
celebrating.
yeah, like I can be somebody
Yeah.
if I do this. um
And
and
that's
the
why representation matters.
Yeah, and that. So yeah, because if that's the only representation you're seeing, then that's what you're going to try and emulate, even though that's
Yeah.
not what he should have been doing. And I love the journey that he goes on of like, he's the cop and he thinks, yeah, I'm going to do this right. And right away when he's getting sworn in, first the white cops just skip over him,
Yep.
and then a black cop has to be like, I guess I'm pinning you. And he's like, I joined because of you. And the guy's like, sorry for you.
Yeah.
Then I apologize. And then he
I
tells him straight up, watch out for the Cyclops. And I was like, ooh, okay. What's this?
and he's like, wait, what? And he's like,
And he
hey,
thinks like, I'm just gonna go. And the first time I watched the show got me when he brings in Donald Trump's dad. I feel like people think I'm joking, but literally they're showing you a thing from real life where Donald Trump was caught at like KKK rallies. He's damaging Jewish owned things, but there is
Mhm.
record of him being arrested for this.
Yeah.
Um, and so they bring in Donald Trump's dad, Fred Trump.
Hmm.
Well, Will does,
Hmm.
and the whole time Fred's like, "What are we doing here? Like, this black guy, he keeps using racial epithets."
Hmm.
And the show got me where the white cop was like, "You talking to one of my fellow officers of the law?" And I'm like, "Oh, I guess because it's like a new timeline or whatever." But
Hmm.
then they show you like, no, not at all. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm sad, but I'm also like, at least they're not making up like that would ever be a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very hard to watch because it's obviously very, very real, and it's just one of those things that, but it's good at the same time because it's like good. Yeah, don't sugarcoat any of this
Yeah,
stuff.
like this is what would this is. I feel like we
It's
talked about like
exactly
two
what
episodes.
happened.
It's like this show is showing you like you're not gonna change it from within.
Yeah.
Like
It's
that
so
whole
naive.
institution needs to be abolished
Yeah.
because
All cops are
back
bastards.
then they were doing that and they're still doing it now. Like it's not a thing for them to be like, well, we'll just do what's right.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to protect something very specific.
Exactly. And you know, and the funny thing is like during COVID and all that kind of stuff, a lot of Asian cops quit the force and just like were just like outright spoken about how much bullying they receive and how much lack of support they get from their own partners and all that kind of stuff because it is just white supremacy in general being like, get these minorities out of here. That's not what we want. And we're like, and if these minorities are going to be here, they're going to support our cause, which is white supremacy. But at the same time, you're never going to be a part of us. Like, we're just going to accept a part of you that does the work for us. Like, that's it.
Yeah, go out and be
Go
a
be the
tool
beat
of your
cop.
own destruction. Like, go do that.
Go oppress your own people. Go be a beat cop in Chinatown and bust skulls.
And that, so then he thinks like, so then after they try to lynch him, well, they don't try to. They actively are just trying to scare him.
Yes.
They begin the lynching, and then they're like, okay, now you get where you stand. Now shut the hell up and do the job the way we need you to do it. He becomes Hooded Justice.
Yep.
I mean, not immediately, but he puts the hood on and he fights, and you can see that he's working something out there. And his wife, well, his partner, I think they're married. They're married, right?
I'm pretty sure they're married.
His wife, I believe, has the idea of like, you can't let people see you're black while you're doing this.
Yeah.
So then they paint his face, which then lines up perfectly with the comics and why people couldn't ever nail down who Hooded Justice was because they were looking for a white guy.
Right.
And so he decides like, yeah, I'm gonna be a superhero. He gets brought into the Minutemen by someone who knows he's black because they're having sex together. And I love that it's like, yeah, they're cops too. So when he's like, okay, now come down here and help, he's like, no, that's
you're on your own.
You do that. I don't want to.
And I like how in that situation, even that romantic relationship, it's like, hey, I would love to see you tonight. Come over to fuck and all that kind of stuff. But you take care of this on your own if that's the case. And I'm like, this is why, like, in my like, it's so hard to talk about without getting personal. But like, this is why a lot of interracial relationships are really, really messed up because it's like, yeah, we like you. I don't support your politics, so I'm really against you fundamentally at the core of it.
As a fundamental personal level, like I don't see you as
an equal.
Yeah,
you're here to serve me and all that kind of stuff. And again, don't want to get personal into it, but that's such a good visual storytelling device to be like, hey, my closeted lover here for very, very, very real fearful reasons at that time is like, yeah, we're in this together and you're inspiring us. But you got to hide every part of it. Even like in that first scene where you see him like having sex with him, it's just like, hey, do me a favor. Always keep the hood on. Always keep this facade and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like he comes at it first from a perspective of like, this is to protect you. And then I'm like, no, it's really to protect yourself more than anything else. And it's just so wild how well written that whole sequence is. And even going to the beginning, like I when I watched that episode, I was like, oh my god, a few episodes before they had such a different take on what Hooded Justice did, and like that in the whole Minutemen series thing that was throughout the whole show, and how they casted a white actor in there because you could see the eyes. And I'm like, this is great because this is what they will spin the PR piece of. This is the origin stories of Hooded Justice. And then, but the reality of what actually happens when she takes the anti-dementia meds or whatever is it? Nostalgia?
It's just nostalgia, which is also great writing that you have people being like, nostalgia is better in small doses. Maybe don't overdose on nostalgia.
Yeah. That is great writing. It's just wild to me of like, oh, that was actually this instead, and mind blown the entire time.
Yeah, that I really wanted to keep that as something that you got to experience untainted because
and
when I saw it, I was like, holy shit. As someone who likes the comic, I was just like, holy shit, like that's so much better. Like that's amazing.
Yeah, because that's actually
but
what
I feel
would
like
happen.
Watching it live without knowing the comic book, it's still great because they keep layering in the white actor as Hooded Justice.
Yeah.
in the in-universe TV show.
Yeah.
So it still works even if you don't have a strong connection to the comic. Like it still works. But I just really, that was my big thing. Even though I was like, I can't do another TV series this, like a TV season this week. I was just like, no, it's important to like get this situated before we get into chapter 1 Watchmen, because it's such an integral part of the show. Because he does that. He becomes head of justice. As everyone says, that's the first masked vigilante, and he realizes, oh, this doesn't help either because I'm invisible again. I can't do the Bass Reeves thing where I take off the hood. I'm stuck like this. I'm a monster. And then that amazing scene where he takes that out on Angela's dad. And then when you go into Angela's memories and her grandmother being like, well, what's with the mask thing? And he's like, oh, my dad said you shouldn't wear masks. She's like, that's because someone hurt him when he was a kid. With a mask. But like that whole generational trauma of like, I saw that as it's all fear. I think they did a good job of being like, it is all fear in the instances I brought up of, I'll name the specific country, Vietnamese, but the black experience, the white experience, I think the show does a great job of showing, even in all those three instances, even though there's a different why, like sort of fear is at the base of those whys. And so like, but this black one of like, it's our lives on the line for real fear. And I think for the Vietnamese, the one they did for Lady True was just the success, and I'm not saying that's for every person that's the fear, but it is, I feel like, something that I've heard as well, of just like, we need you to be successful. So the fear is that you're going to do something and you won't be the best. So she has to be, which like she says to Adrian White, like, I'm going to be the smartest woman. I am the smartest woman. And I need you to stake me the money because you're my dad and everything. But it is like the trauma passed on to her is like, like, how am I going to pay off this sacrifice my parent made? When she, like, my mom risked everything to do this, how am I going to pay that off? And then for the white people, they're thinking we're going to get killed off, and knowing they're not going to, but they're projecting how they know they want to kill off other people and being like, well, if they ever got a chance, they're going to do that to us. And I say this a lot on my other podcast on colonies. When I'm saying white people, I don't mean all white people. This is like when people are like, oh, not all men, but I mean like people who buy into the construct of whiteness. So the people essentially who are trying to hold up white supremacy. That is what I mean by white people. I know that no group is a monolith in that sense, but it's just, that is what I mean. People who try to hold up white supremacy. That's what I mean by white people.
It's such a difficult conversation because when you talk about it, and I think the interesting thing is like, women get this to the degree of like, they'll be like, all men are this, but then they'll celebrate their dads, for example. They'll celebrate the people that they actually know. And I'm like, okay, so there's nuance to this. It's not all men, but you're using the language, and someone that knows the nuance of what you're talking about will not go to be like, not all men, all this kind of stuff. They're just gonna be like, okay, there's no better language for this, right?
And so a lot of that comes out of, like, I know recently people are being upset about the man versus bear in the woods thing, and I was like, but I don't identify as someone that would hurt them. So when they say I'd rather choose a bear, I'm like, I get that. I understand what you mean.
Because if you look at the statistic, absolutely. I'm like, if someone said this to me, I'm like, I get why you would say that.
And then the issue came when black women were like, great, okay. Now, corporate setting, who would you rather be alone in the room with, white man or white woman? And most black women were like, the white guy, obviously. Because they're like, that guy knows he can't do shit. So like, either you're going to know ahead of time what he's about to do, or he's going to be so worried about the racism that he just, whereas the white women are conditioned to compete. So it's like higher chance of something wrong going there.
Completely. It's such an interesting discussion because you'll have, like, in Japan, for example, even though they were bombed by America and massive death and all that kind of stuff, you'll have a huge subsection of the population that's like very, very, I love America, pro America, all this kind of stuff. And they're like contributing to that own internalized racism that they have. And this is post World War II and still
Hmm. And
present
I'm
to this
assuming
day.
that's like out of self-preservation of like,
It
hey,
is.
don't do it again. We love you. Like, and
Yeah,
I'm not saying everyone who
absolutely.
does that is thinking that actively, but I
Mhm.
would have got to imagine there's a certain group of people that were like, again, that fear-based trauma you passed on of like, hey, 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 look, no, no, we're waving the white flag. We love it here. Like, we're waving the
Yep.
red, white, and blue flag here. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, because that's a lot of the generational trauma that I inherited, and that I had to work through over the past few years and all that kind of stuff. And it's really for a lot of Asians, in North America, they don't have the ability to work through that, and they just and this is why I love Lady True's kind of character is the idea of like you have to be the best, that inherent kind of competition, because that competition in Asia is very, very real. Because when
Hmm.
you look at the work culture there, when you look at the competition from a school culture and all that kind of stuff, it's just like, yeah, I understand why they would be hyper competitive because you have so many people competing for such little things. And then when you're competing for like, let's say thousands of people competing for one job, and that
Hmm.
one job to us sounds like torture because it's like, yeah, you have 80-hour work weeks, 6 days a week. And on the last day, like on the one day off, it's really not a day off because you're
No.
expected to do outside stuff supporting your work to show that you're a part of the team. So
Hmm.
you're like in this trap of like knowing the fear of I got this job and I'm easily replaceable by thousands of people that are just as, if not more qualified than I am. So you got to do every single thing to just grind and work. That fear is very, very real, right? So I think Lady Chu's character Hong Chao brings such a great, great Asian experience to that, even though the Vietnamese history of this is just like, yeah, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. No,
still very,
I really like Hong Chao as an actor.
yes, she's
Um,
great.
uh, and I loved her in this. I think this is the
Mhm,
first thing I spent a lot of time with her in.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and I love that, kind of like the woman you were talking about, Don Johnson's wife.
yes.
She never has moments of being like, "Oh shit, what do I do now?" Like she's always like, "Yeah, no, no, I know. This is what's happening." Like
Yeah.
when she's like, "Oh, where'd the senator go?" And then I think the white people are kind of like, "Yeah, we got her," and
Yeah.
she's like, "Oh, he went in. What an idiot. Okay, let me show you what happened to him." Like
Mhm,
I really appreciated how self actualized she was, but while also getting across that thing I'm talking about the different angles of trauma being passed on, because then
mhm,
you get to Angela and what she's passing on specifically to her son, which
mhm,
I think the first time I watched, I was kind of like, her son's kind of a bummer, but I
mhm.
really, I really liked their relationship in this. Not that I thought it was healthy, I just really liked what they were showing you, which is he
Yes.
so desperately wants to be like her,
Yeah.
to like the point of like, oh yeah, you just found out your uncle's dead. Can I just go watch TV? Like I'm not gonna let my feelings burden the people around me, which is what Angela does. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I got shot, so like I'm gonna hide who I am, and I'm not gonna talk about it, and I'm not gonna like let everyone be afraid.
Mhm,
Um, down to like he sees that she's Sister Night at the end of the show,
mhm.
and is like, okay, like it's just like, I say that's trauma because it's like, well, that's just another thing you're not going to discuss with your mother. Like that's another
Yes.
thing you don't have access to.
And it's challenged because even though let's say you are going to discuss that with your mother, right? It's going to take you years before you're at the place where you have the emotional maturity to actually approach that subject
Because you know that's
properly.
something she's been hiding.
Exactly.
It's not like she's like, oh yeah, it never came up. Like
Yeah.
like she's been hiding it and lying about it this whole
Yep.
time, and he is so I feel he has such respect for her that he's like, well,
Hmm.
then that must be a good reason that she did that. And as you said, it will take time before he's like, well, maybe I should, maybe I should broach this subject.
Yeah, yeah, because for me, the idea of like, okay, knowing that my parents went through a lot of trauma to immigrate here and their childhood and all that kind of stuff and the trauma that they got, exposed to from their parents, my grandparents.
Hmm.
It was just one of those things where I knew it exists, but how do you talk to them about that
Hmm.
under the age of like 15, right? You're still doing like, oh, I hope I don't disappoint the family or
Hmm.
this or this or this. And you're busy trying to find your way through your own emotions that up until the point where like it was only in the past like 5 years or so where I'm like, let's start having some of these
Hmm.
difficult conversations. And that's such a difficult thing. So I love the way that her son and her have that relationship where it's like, this is, and I love what you said, it's not healthy at all, but it is a very real thing to be like, I'm not going to burden my mom, my
Hmm.
adoptive mom.
Yeah, we
That's,
should say the big thing that leads to cops. I love the visual, they like yellow
Mhm.
over their faces. The big
Yes,
thing that leads to that is the night that the people who love Rorschach, I can't remember what they're called, the Seventh Cavalry.
Seventh Cavalry. Oh.
They find out where all the cops live because yeah, and then they shoot them up. And
Yeah.
so then Angela takes on the kids of, was it her partner? And either way, it's like
Yeah.
someone she really liked at the police force. Like
Yes.
obviously someone she was really close with.
Hmm.
So she took their kids, three of them,
Yeah.
two daughters and a son. So yeah, so you're right to point out that it's his adoptive mom. But I just love in the
Mhm.
first scene you see them together when she's talking to the class and the kid's like, "Oh, would you get that from Redfordations?" Like, because her front is that she's going
Mm.
to open a bakery,
Yep.
and so it's not even open. It's just, oh yeah, that's happening, so that she always has an excuse to leave, and then
Hmm.
she can have her little bat cave
Hmm.
at the bakery, quote unquote. And the son punches the kid, and when when she asks him, "Why'd you do that?" He's like, "Because you wanted to." And she, like, I
Yeah.
think that was what I didn't. I didn't glom onto that the first time. I was kind of just like, oh my god, like he's so or moody or whatever. And this time I was like, yeah, he's like, she can't do that right now, but I can. I could.
Hmm.
I feel like he made the calculation of like, obviously my adult mother can't hit this kid. I can hit him though.
Hmm. Yeah. I wasn't annoyed with that kid quite so much. I was like, this kid is so good.
Hmm.
Like, really, really understands what's going on, and still a kid in the sense where it's
Yeah,
like,
he's a
hey,
kid.
I'm not gonna hold back. I'm gonna act on emotion. I'm gonna do these kind of things. But his read of the whole situation, his read of his mom being like, yeah, she is not gonna stand by and listen to these microaggressions from a freaking kid, but she's gonna have to because of her position in
Hmm.
what's happening in that scene. I'm like, this is just brilliant, brilliant writing. It's so
Yeah,
good. Um,
I really like the writing in the show.
mhm.
Um, this leads us to her husband, who I will admit the first time I was watching, I was like, they're gonna do Black Superman because he's his name, like that's Calvin is like the Black Superman. They're gonna do it. They're gonna
Right.
do it, and then I like where they actually went with it. But I
Yeah.
thought they were doing that because when they do the Will Reeves thing, and the show doesn't let you forget it because they bring it back later. But when you first see Will Reeves leaving the movie theater, they're doing Superman. Like they're doing like, oh, Krypton's exploding. We got to get you back to Earth.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, they just keep hitting. And they do the one where Lady True comes to the family,
Right.
and you assume it isn't them, but it's like, oh, like are they doing Lady True created Superman by giving them this kid?
Mhm.
So there's all these allusions to Superman, and I'm like, I think they're gonna do it, and then they're like, nah, he's Dr. Manhattan, and I was like, well, I like that even better. All right, like
Yeah, it's
that's
way, way
actually
better.
on brand for a Watchmen show.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, Cal is. This is the other part I like. I don't know how it plays into trauma so much as I just
Mhm.
liked the love story. That it was like you already know that Dr. Manhattan has had other lovers from the comics, including the Jean Smart character.
Yeah.
Um, which is just interesting the way she's constantly making comments about Cal, and I don't think she knew that that was Dr. Manhattan. I think
I don't think
it's
so
just
either.
it's just an interesting choice. I'm hoping by the actor to be like, I'm gonna hit on her husband,
Mhm.
because they didn't know, they didn't tell Yahya Abdul Mateen he was going to play Doctor Manhattan when he
Oh,
signed on.
really?
He was like, they obviously obviously through filming they told him, but it was like he
Mhm.
just got hired. He's like, I get to be Regina King's husband, yeah, I'll do that. And again, I got to listen to him on the podcast. He was saying, my job was just, I am the guy that clears the hurdles for Angela. In my head, that's what I was playing. Like, I'm
Right.
just, but there is a moment they had to tell him, and I can see sequentially like where you start seeing him be able to play a bit of, okay, that might be Dr. Manhattan. Like, there's just certain times like, oh, did this happen before my accident? The line obviously is alluding, but I feel like the way he plays it as well is kind of like it's creeping out. The Dr. Manhattan is a bit creeping out there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I
basically he comes to Angela. He's like, I love you. And because he experienced time all at once, you don't have to worry about, well, when did that happen? Because it's happening all at once for him.
Yeah.
And they decide, in order for the relationship to work, he can't function as
He
Dr.
can't
Manhattan.
be. Yeah, he has to nerf himself
So
basically.
he works with Ozymandias to nerf himself, as that's a good way of putting it. But I feel like he said before that like it's going to be 10 years. Like, we'll get 10 years out of this.
And that whole
I love
bar
that
episode is
I love
so
the name
good.
of the episode. I love the episode.
Yeah. It's amazing because, like, even it's like, well, if it ends in trauma or ends terribly, then whatever. And he's like, by definition, doesn't every romantic
Yes.
romantic relationship end terribly? I'm like, that's a great. There's
Yeah.
no such thing as a romantic relationship that doesn't end terribly, unless it's like, oh,
unless you die together. Like,
exactly.
It's the only way it can work, and that's still a tragedy for the people who love you. Like, it's like
it's not great.
You're gonna one of you's gonna die first, or you break up, and that's upsetting. Like, it's yeah. I just, that's why I said I understand tangentially how it can be seen as trauma, but I feel like it just felt like a nice love story, because I think everything about them interacting, once it's clear he's Dr. Manhattan, is great, even down to when she's like, you could have sent me to go do something, and he's like, I didn't want to die alone. And it's important because he's saying that to Angela, knowing that he sent away the other famous girlfriend we know he had from the comic. It's like, he sent her away, and he's just like, you're not going to save me, but I also want you here with me in this moment.
And that's what I love about this Dr. Manhattan versus, like, and obviously I was a younger one, but he really genuinely wants to be a part of humanity and experience it, because he's so devoid of humanity in like the movie, which again, not the best example of.
If you watch it again, I understand the performance, and I think it only works if you do believe he wanted to be part of humanity. So I think that works. I think what doesn't work about that movie is that Zack Snyder thought it was about how cool beating people up is. And that's the exact opposite of what Watchmen is about.
So that's why I have to always.
I still think the movie in a vacuum works for the logic he created. But I do think he did get the frustration that Dr. Manhattan had. He can't play it as frustration, but that is the frustration he has, is that he wants to be a part of it, but couldn't possibly be a part of it because of a bunch of factors around how he experiences time, but also how people experience him. I think that element actually works about the Snyder one. This is just better because we're coming at it at a different angle.
It's even when he's like, you're not saving me, you can't do this. Like, when you think he's like, oh yeah, we took out all the racist attack that's gonna do it. It's like, we didn't win though. And then he gets like teleported, and you're like, holy crap, this guy really does experience everything at the same time. And it's just like, this is intense.
Because I was like, oh, Angela's doing such a great job. Like, to be clear, I love Regina King and as an actor, but I loved her as Angela Aber, one of my favorite characters. Like, especially anytime she has to go up against Jean Smart, like when Jean Smart like is like, oh, this is this, and then she just goes, ooh, okay, I don't care. And I was like, yay.
I will say, I think one of the most infuriating things for me was in the before I found out he's Dr. Manhattan, was being like, yeah, why are they underutilizing Yaya right now? And I'm like, are they purposely trying to, because it seems like with every element of how well done this show is, are they just being like, are they gender swapping the idea of the hero being the man and like the woman, the and you know, all that kind of stuff. But then I'm like, oh no, this is great. This is even better payoff of like
I think it's
everything.
good because the whole point is they took away the whole, like, yeah, he's just supposed to be docile. So like
Yeah,
to me it works.
it works
I know
so
what you're
well.
saying though, but yeah, but it is one of those things where it's like, yeah, no, just wait till the end. They're going somewhere with this.
Yeah, yeah, because I'm just like, why would you cast Yaya for something like this?
I
It's
mean,
such a
it
waste of his
works.
talents.
It
And
actually
then
does work when you realize it's being filmed while he's doing Aquaman and a bunch of other things. So it is
that's
just
true
like
too.
another thing he's in where you're like, okay, cool. Like I guess you got stock in Yahya Abdul Mateen before like you couldn't. And then
Before
it
he
was like,
just,
oh no, actually you cast him as like the big idea of the show of Dr.
yeah,
Manhattan.
it's so well done. It's so well done.
And I
Like that.
love their discussion about like when it's like Angela's like, you could be anyone. Why are you picking like? Or no, he tells Angela that like, you
Mhm.
just pick these three white guys. Why? Like, I could look like anything. And then
Yeah,
she's like, oh, well then this guy.
here's this guy.
And I guess he was also like, do they have to be dead? And she's like, yes, they do. They have to be soldiers. They have to be dead. Like, it, I feel like they really thought out how this was going to work, and
Yep,
it I think it pays off that
it's
all
so
the
good.
effort they put into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. Um, I feel like we keep going back to the beginning, but I do want to talk about. I can't remember the character's name, but it's the Don Johnson character because I was just like, I don't know what he's like in real life. I
Mhm.
know he's Madam Web's dad, but I don't know what he's like. I don't know what he's like in real. I'm just like, he plays a lot of racists. I just have to say, like, Django, like this,
Yep.
and it's like I just was like, oh, he's nice in this, like, and he's like Regina King's best friend, and
Hmm.
then the episode like where she like goes snooping around and sees his like I
His,
feel like it's a Grand Wizard thing. I feel like it's not just a regular KKK outfit. I feel like it's like no, this is a high
I,
up one. And then
yeah.
and
I
I just
mean,
like that Wolverine's like, you literally were snooping around in his room. I just meant like you actually went in the closet. I didn't like. I just meant like metaphorically, he's got
mhm.
skeletons in the closet.
Yeah,
He's
I
like, oh,
thought
I
that
mean,
was
it
really
makes sense.
funny.
He's racist, but I didn't really think this was what he was doing.
Yeah, yeah, and God, this is one of the biggest things, and the difference between nice and kind is that nice is looking to hide something, it's transactional, all that kind of stuff, which is exactly what his character and what's her face's character, the wife's character too,
Hmm.
to Don Johnson is the entire time. Like, oh, this is a nice dinner. This is almost too nice. What's going
Hmm.
on here? And then it all spins out of control and all that kind of stuff. And then you see Will Reeves in the wheelchair. It's like, oh, do you think I can do this? Do you think I'm like, this is just such
And he just gets him to hang himself.
yeah.
And
And using the same fucking Cyclops thing that he
yeah,
was like took down earlier. I'm like, this is great. This is really,
so
really
good.
great.
But yeah, just that just this brief exchange of get rid of it. And he's like, no, I haven't just as much right to it. It's my
Yeah.
legacy. And it's like, a KKK outfit? That's your legacy?
I mean, it's the same argument for the Confederate
No,
flag
but that's what I'm
flyers.
saying.
Yeah.
That's why I like the exchange. Like,
Yep.
this show is showing you the pitfalls of everyone who's like,
Hmm.
oh, just it's our history for this exchange, or oh, yeah, you could change it from the inside for the people who want to be cops. So I really liked that the Gene Smart character. Great introduction.
Oh
As I
God,
said, I
so
love
good.
that she is playing it. Obviously, she respects her mom, but like just playing it like the comedian. And I'm like, this is the first time where I get the whole comedian thing. I think because Zack Snyder didn't fully understand the material, his Jeffrey Dean Morgan comedian, I was like, he's not. I'm not saying he's supposed to be making haha funny jokes, but the delivery, it's like, um, well, it's an episode that'll come out later, what we're
Mm.
talking about for Batman and Robin. Like, yeah, the writing's there, but the delivery makes it seem like you don't understand what you're delivering.
Yeah.
Whereas this is the perfect deployment of quote unquote the comedian.
Yes.
She's not trying to make people laugh and be the butt of the joke. She is trying to make people feel bad. She wants people to feel as bad as she feels. And she's joking, and that is the whole it's all a fucking joke thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like it is. Yeah. I just think that she understood that.
It is yeah, very, very much so. And that's one of the biggest issues with, I guess, the comedian characters. Like, yeah, you're ha funny, but like inherently all comedians are like really, really depressed people that are just like finding the ridiculous humor in a messed up situation, right? And I think she does that so well in this whole
and
thing.
I like when she's like captured, when she's like, I feel like it's entrapment, but it's like basically she sets up a bank robbery.
Yep.
It's like, you wouldn't be doing vigilante work right now, would you? Because that's illegal. I could take you in, and then everyone becomes the FBI, and you're like,
yeah.
I think that's
except for the bank tellers.
It's the only quibble I have with the show is that at the end when she's with Ozymandias and still arrests him, I'm like, feels like they're saying like, but we should still have cops to like get the bad guys. I'm like, no,
yeah.
But you can't really argue with Ozymandias. I in real time I was like, he did change though, didn't he? Didn't he? And then he's like disproves my point. Like, it's an engaging scene. But it was me being like, but her whole thing of like people change, and I'm like, yeah, and he did, and then she's like, but not you, and then he proves her right by acting like an asshole again, and you're like,
yeah,
I guess, yeah. What are you gonna do with this guy? He's not gonna change.
He's never gonna change. And I like how self-aware the show is when Jeremy Irons goes like, well, he says it so convolutedly in Latin, but he's like, oh yeah, it takes one to know one. He's like, oh, she's a raging narcissist. And it's like, oh yeah, it takes one to know one. And I'm like, okay, yeah, narcissists never change. That's great writing to be like, yeah, and you're under arrest. You may have saved, you're under arrest because you killed 3 million people or something like that. And it's just like, what, you think you're going to get away with it because you think you saved humanity? No. And I love the part where she's like, that's the funny thing is like, people keep saying that. Never really seems to happen. Yeah. It's just like, yeah, this is great. This is great writing.
Yeah. And I like the Tim Blake Nelson character, like visually, but also I love that whole, but no, let's stay on, what is her name? Jean Smart's character. I keep forgetting to look at what her character's name is.
I keep wanting to call her Silk Spectre too.
Yeah, it's Lori. She goes by Lori Blake in this because I can't pronounce her mom's maiden name, so I'm gonna stick with Blake here.
Sure.
Yeah, her whole thing. I like that it's like she finds where she fits in, which is like, yeah, I came here to stop the whole vigilante thing from sort of like Will Reeves of like, I know what that shit means. Like to think that you could be a vigilante. We got to stop that. We got to shut that down. Obviously, as a comic book fan, I don't agree, but also in this universe, you're definitely like, yeah, you can't have these guys running around. These guys are no good.
Yeah.
They are a menace. They are true
especially
menace.
with what the Watchmen comic is trying to address of like, who has oversight over the vigilantes and all that kind of stuff, because cops don't seem to want to do it as long as it's like, yeah, you're making my job easier and all that kind of stuff.
And
right?
they're showing you the politics of these people.
Yes.
It isn't the Captain America, what if we need to go somewhere and they won't let us? Like, this is just like, nope, I don't like black people. I don't like gay people.
I'm above the law and I can do whatever the hell I want.
So I will terrorize people that I don't agree with. So it's like, yeah, these people need to be shut down.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, it also means that they're like, so we gotta depend on good old fashioned crime fighting from police, and I'm like,
no.
That's that. As I said, it's the one quibble I have, but it's attached to a scene that engaged me so much because of the writing and how things are revealed throughout it. I feel like it's a really well executed scene.
Yeah, because it definitely it's. I don't think it's pro cop. It's just like anti-hero in that regard, unchecked power. And it's kind of like how Winston Churchill describes democracy as the second worst system that we have, meaning like, yeah, it's all of it's bad, but this is just like, compared to this, you'd want cops over a superhero in a
I
thing.
think that's why I think it's pro cop, because that shouldn't be the conclusion. The conclusion should be more community building and I can't say it without saying the word, but like self policing, like that kind of that idea that if you had a group, like it's a microcosm, that scene is a microcosm of
Yes.
these two people coming together, understanding that there is someone in their group that is doing something wrong and being like, you need to be on timeout right now.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. I understand what you're saying about like it's not actively being like, yeah, the cops are great, and that one could argue, as you said, it's more anti unchecked power.
Yep.
The problem with things like that I always talk about is when you try to simplify things like that, there's always things that get left out. So by omission, you're saying things are okay.
Yeah.
So the example I always give is like, oh, we can't read books in school that have the F, like fuck, in it, but we're gonna make kids read Huck Finn where they say nigger Jim all the time.
Yeah.
So it's like you tried to make this simple, no swearing, but it's like, oh, but now the black kids have to just normalize reading nigger Jim and have that be called classic to them.
Yeah.
To their face. So that's what I mean. Like it's really, you can either let it all out and let people make their own decision, but once you start putting your foot on the gas on one of those things, by omission, you're letting other things slide.
I completely agree with you on that. It's, and I fully understand that not everyone is willing to have this type of discussion about the material that they consume, like you and I are, right? Which is why I think it's important that we have these conversations publicly for people to consume. But if it's just like, if there's anything that's anti-cop in this and anti-unchecked power, it is the Tulsa thing in the beginning where it's like, Tulsa, it's like that whole.
I don't feel like that's anti-cop so much as just anti-American, which I'm fine with. Which is like
what I mean by that is that, like you said, self-policing. I'm like, that area was self-policed. They were so thriving. That was like the pinnacle of everything, and it was just white supremacists that like,
but
nope,
that's
can't
government
have that.
sanctioned. The reason I say that is because that was government sanctioned. So that's like anti-American government.
Sure.
And
which
yes,
is
cops
aligned
are part
with
of that,
white
but
supremacy.
that's not a one-to-one connection being made there. That is
correct.
So that's why I'm saying, like, I agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying that that is good for a different reason to me, because it doesn't act. You don't see. Actually, maybe you do see cops, but once you see those Zeppelins go over and drop bombs, it's like, oh, that's the reminder. This was the government's idea to stop this. Which isn't necessarily cops. That's just the government being like, fuck them.
Yeah,
like they're not gonna act. And I think it's also important for black capitalists to see that, like people like Killer Mike that are like, oh no, just buy black and then you'll or like a Jay-Z, like just like just there should be black billionaires. And it's like, they're not gonna let that happen, one. And two, if you're doing that, then who is still going to be fucked over in that? Still black people, because capitalism only works if you are exploiting somebody. That is the baseline of capitalism, is someone needs to be exploited.
And if it's not black people, then it's going to be Asians, it's going to be Latinos, it's going to be someone else.
Like, it doesn't make it better just because the rich people are black. Like, if you're engaging in that, then it's bad.
It's all bad. I mean, the idea of capitalism, and this is not an anti-capitalism kind of piece this show is describing, but it's just the idea
more anti-black. This is that's why I'm adding this commentary of like, I like the visuals, and I'm not saying you disagree. I'm just saying, like, I like the having this to show as a reminder, like, you're coming at this like this wasn't tried already twice,
right?
In America.
It's just, it's wild to me how, like, and this is again, and that's why Ozinda Myas is all like, I used a bigger power, fear, and it's the white supremacy fear that they're going to be replaced, right? You go back to Charlotte, like, you cannot replace us with tiki torches.
Yes.
You go to all it's fear that is driving all these kind of things, fear of disrupting the current social hierarchy that promises power to people. That's why I think the senator is such a good character in the idea of like, hey, this is do you know what it's like to be a white man in America? I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? All this kind of, so you can't do
He's
this
like, I'm
anymore.
gonna try being a blue man.
Yeah, and I'm like, I like that writing. That was
Yeah.
really good. I'm like, that was nice. That was
Yeah,
really,
I
really
think
good.
that's the important thing. He's like, I'm not racist because he thinks racism is just like, well, I don't say the N word.
Yes.
He's like, but he still wants to be the unquestionably powerful, like high up.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So, yeah,
It's
what I
so
like about the
hard.
show is it doesn't let people off the hook.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about all across the board. Like,
Mhm.
doesn't let the black capitalists off the hook for
Yep.
thinking they can just do black capitalism. It doesn't let people off the hook if they're not actively anti-racist.
Mhm.
Just not saying something doesn't make you anti-racist.
Yep. And that is like, I've cut off so many bridges with people in my life because they're like, oh, I'm not racist. I don't do this. I don't say this. I'm like, but this is the politics that you support. And I love the fact that the show always has this through line of being like, this is and I think within the relationship of Cal and oh God, Regina is best reflected in
Angela,
this.
yeah.
And Angela, sorry, that they keep going like, she says she doesn't want a family, but all her actions indicate that she does, like all her behaviors do. And that is such a great thing to point out, is the idea of like, it's not what you say, it's what you end up doing. If you vote for people that are like, oh yeah, I'm anti, just pro oppression, and pro white supremacy, all this kind of stuff, it doesn't matter. It's like, oh, I have a black friend, I have an Asian friend. I'm like, yeah, but you're using them as a shield
Exactly.
against criticism of
yeah.
you being racist and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's such a challenge to have these conversations, because the moment these conversations are had with, in my experience, white people, it's just shut down defensiveness right away. You cannot get any other word through, and it's just like, oh God, now I have to. It's about protecting white fragility again, and doing this and doing this, and this show does such a good job of unpacking all those things while still being fundamentally, at the end of the day, a well written, well told story that's just so good, so
I love
incredibly
it.
good. I don't think we've talked
we haven't
enough.
talked about Ozymandias, like,
Yes.
because I love that payoff of he was there the whole time.
Yes.
Basically, you're watching him in every episode on Jupiter. You don't know it's Jupiter right away, but
right.
Essentially, Dr. Manhattan created his paradise on Jupiter and then sent. I believe they had a deal. I don't really remember the details of the deal, but they had a deal, and so Ozymandias gets sent there, and he just has to, like, he says, I just had 8 years to kill up here.
Yeah.
And he's constantly, like, he's writing a play about how Dr. Manhattan was born. We've seen that in the movie where he leaves his watch. And he keeps birthing this pair of people, like Miss Crookshanks, and I don't remember the guy's name.
Right.
But yeah, so they all call him Master. Yeah. And he can be as rude to them as he wants. And then I love that when they put him on trial, he, like, his response is farting at them and just being, I don't give a fuck on any of this. Put me in jail. Yeah. And I was tricked this time as well when he's so happy to have the horseshoe, and I'm like, wow, he's gonna just scrape his way out of there. I'm like, no. Then by the end of the show, you're like, oh no, he was creating a weapon. I thought he was like, shit. I thought he was trying to, like, break away at the brick. But yeah, he's just on Jupiter until he gets his daughter to save him. Yeah. Daughter being Lady True. Yeah. And he won't give them an inch, even at the last moment when the game master is like, so did I do a good job? Was I worthy? And he's like, no, you weren't. No, you weren't. Because I was like, yeah, the guy's like, "Why'd you make me wear a mask?" And the show's very clear on this. Like, mask means hate. Like,
Mhm.
if you're wearing a mask, you got hate. Even though later on, Will's like, I mean, it's more fear, but yeah, you can
Mhm.
call that whatever. He's like, yeah, it just means a hateful person. So yeah, I just needed a worthy adversary. And the guy's like, yeah, so was I? And he's like, no. And I'm
No,
like, you
you weren't.
motherfucker, get out of
You're
here.
all
Just
by
leave.
design. He's
Just leave.
so jealous of Dr. Manhattan in
Mm-hmm.
the sense where it's just like he clearly wants to be him and design all those kind of things and all. It's just the idea of him being there sounds like paradise, but in the original trade-off was like, hey, Dr. Manhattan's like, I see you're clearly like frustrated the fact that you keep trying to achieve world peace and they keep screwing it up. They keep having because he's like, there's this one scene where he's like, why do they keep doing the military
Mm-hmm.
or the nuclear arms? Why do they keep doing this? Why do they keep doing this? And Dr. Manhattan's like, well, it might be counterintuitive, but
They
it
think
makes them
it's
feel
safer.
safer,
Yeah.
in all this kind of stuff. And he's just he has to take a break basically. And would you like me to send you here? This is I created this paradise and all this kind of stuff. He's like, that sounds lovely. Let's do that. And he disconnects for a while and he goes uh, almost insane
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out how to under his own terms get back to
Get
earth and
back
all that
without
kind of
help,
stuff.
but he can't.
Exactly, but he can't he tries to design his own thing, but all he could do at the end of the day is he has to bow down to the fact that I have to acknowledge her as my daughter, even though the way she was born or conceived was like. And I love this. I
I
love the
love when she
idea.
tells him, because he's like,
Yeah,
"No, I've never given myself to a woman," which also plays into the comics. They're like, "Was this guy gay?" And
yeah,
he's like, "No, that's impossible. I've never given myself to a woman." And she's like, "Oh, that's Alexander the Great, and
yep,
your cum collection is behind there." And
yep.
she's like, "Hey, I'm X234." I'm like, "Perfect." Like,
Yeah, it's so good. I'm like,
and I love that he's not like, "No, this is a lie." He's like, "No, she got me." Like, that's
yeah,
she knows.
that's
She knows.
she is the smartest woman in the world, and it was just such good writing. It's every part of that so good. And
Even when she's like, "You're not gonna get what you want because you're just a man," and he's like, "Oh, so women can do it?" And she's like, "No, I'm just a woman." Because everyone's idea is like, "We're gonna use Doctor Manhattan." And she's like, "Yeah,
yeah,
like I know my limitations. You don't, but I do, and I'm saying we need to use Doctor Manhattan for what
yeah,
we're trying to do here."
yeah. There's a humility in the
Hmm.
recognition of like I still need to use this person, but with him, he's trying to be Dr. Manhattan, like in the sense where if Dr. Manhattan truly wanted, he could be truly self-sufficient if he wanted,
Hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. It's just that he had enough of human exposure as a kid to be like, no, no, I miss this enough, right?
Well, just the way he describes seeing those people having sex and being like, "Wow, like that was
Yeah,
love." I
yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah, and
And that they talked to him after. Obviously, and sorry, we should say for people who haven't
mhm.
watched, those two people he saw as sex are the two people that he keeps replicating in.
Mr. Phillips and Miss Quickshanks,
Yeah, well,
and
that's not their names in there because they were German
yeah,
in when he saw them. So
yeah,
these
that's what
British
they're.
people are just like, it's the same actors, but they are supposed to. It's his Adam and Eve, so they look like the
Mhm.
first signs of love he saw.
Yeah, and I like that she's like, "Here, I have a present for you. Here's the Bible, you sinner,"
Yeah.
and all
But I
this
also
kind of
like that
stuff.
they were like, what you saw was like a beautiful thing. Like
Yeah,
I enjoyed that aspect of it. Not, yeah, I wasn't like big on the and here's the Bible.
yeah. Obviously not a big fan of that, but I mean, and here's the thing: when you're like, "Oh, this is Superman. This is Superman," I've heard a lot of people be like, "Okay, the story of Superman is actually the story of Jesus," and I'm like,
Hmm.
"There's so many parallels." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, that's really really good." So the fact that she gives him the Bible to complete that whole arc of like, "Yeah, we got there," it's really really good to me. I'm like, "Yeah, this they know what they're doing. They so clearly know what they're doing here." And the story of and he does that too. Is like, well, he does the Jesus thing on what is that moon of Jupiter or whatever. He's like, I created
Oh, right, because she's like, oh, you're on Jupiter. He's like, what's a moon? Not, it's not Jupiter. It's the moon
right.
of Jupiter.
Yeah, and he goes like, well, I created this, and like he just stopped because he's like, yeah, I don't want to. Oh, I want to get away from humanity and I want to have servants. I didn't want to, do whatever. And the idea of it like, yeah, I got tired of just constantly being worshipped all the time. Like
Hmm.
I want to be dumb a little bit. And it's for him to go like, hey, Ananias, can you help me be dumb? Here's here's the thing, and he's already like, yep, I got the solution for you, baby. You
Yeah.
might as well wrap up all the things you need while you're still omnipotent because you're gonna be real dumb. And yeah, it's
I
great
guess dumb is relative here because Cal isn't dumb. He's just not.
compared to
Yeah.
Dr.
Yeah.
Manhattan's like god level power and
Yes.
like
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. He dumb, but
Because
you're right. As a
I actually
man,
liked
he's
Cal
great.
being like, especially when he's asked, what happens when you die, and he's just like, what? You were nothing before you were born. You live, you die, and then you're
Mm-hmm.
back to being nothing.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, what about heaven? He's like, oh, that's not a thing. Like, I liked that he was just like, what? There's a scene where she's like, oh, so you lied and you hate lying. He's like, yeah, I hate lying. And
Mm-hmm.
you're just like, oh, yeah, he's not dumb. He's just not like Dr. Manhattan. Actually, he's like not really up for pretending to be less than he is.
Yeah, yeah, and it's yeah, it's a god level of autism, so to speak. It's wild what they do there and how they always like, oh yeah, autism is a superpower and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't like
And
that discourse.
I
But
don't love that discourse, but that's clearly what they keep trying to do.
I don't think that's what they were doing here. But.
Okay, well, fair enough, but that's how I saw it. But of course, we all read things differently. But the Zendamaya's character in this is just it really, really good. The jealousy, the everything that Jeremy Irons brings to this, and I love Jeremy Irons. I think he's such a great actor, and the idea of him being like, "What's wrong with this outfit? It looks
Yes,
so silly."
or when they were like, or when Lori sees him for the first time and is like, why'd you make him so old? Because he is old, and we're in my culture, we don't like fear getting older and smarter.
Yeah,
I
because
really like that.
I like that a lot because it's very, very true in the sense where it's a privilege to grow old, and
Mm-hmm.
in countries where you don't have the same resources, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
to be old is a really, really powerful thing. Like that's why there's in Asian like Asian families, like you have the oldest mother as like the grandmother or whatever as the whole power of the whole household and all that kind of stuff
Mm-hmm.
because you're celebrating the life giver, the legacy giver, and all that kind of stuff. And I love the fact that she goes like, if you talk to me about legacy, it's not property, it's like a person and all this kind of. It's like this is just so well done. What is legacy and the idea of like them just playing around as gods with their
Mm-hmm.
intellect? It's so good.
It's a great
Um,
show.
but yeah,
Do we miss
Looking
some
Glass
characters?
we didn't talk about that much.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I really
Mhm.
liked his. You saw that he was kind of like a religious zealot.
Yep.
And we actually get to spend time with someone who experienced the 85 squid thing as
Yep.
a civilian, not as a superpowered person or a
Yep.
hero, whatever you want to call them.
Mhm.
And so it's this thing where he attaches that to like the first time he like let a woman arouse him actively and
Mhm.
get him naked, and he thought he was going to sin,
Mhm.
and then she just ran off with his stuff. But then also basically everyone he knew died.
Yep.
And he was just like, I love that time, like the moment you meet his ex,
Yeah.
because you're just like, oh, what happened there? And she's just like, you just forced me to constantly have to prove I wasn't going to run off with your clothes.
Mhm.
And so that's not generational trauma so much as just bringing that trauma to a relationship and
Mhm.
having that consume it.
Yeah, it's very much a minor mirror of what Will Reeves has. Is like, hey, okay, I'm angry. I got to deal with this, and like him putting on the mask and all that kind of stuff. He thought he was dealing with it, and the same thing of like, no, if you don't deal with this productively, it follows you and it affects every single part of
Because
your
then he
life.
gets tricked again with the woman.
Yes, he
and the
does.
thing, and you're just like, yeah, man, like
He gets honeypotted for
yeah,
sure.
you're trying to block out the world and try to be this logical person instead of. It is weird just because they do set up like the whole thing is he can see what people
Mhm.
actually mean and not
Yeah.
what they're saying, but I don't think that's a flaw. I think it makes it more interesting that he got rid of that for this woman that he clearly was interested in, and she
Yes.
got him.
Yeah, it's definitely it's one of those things where hyper logical people and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, it's a defense mechanism, dude.
Hmm.
You're just afraid to feel. Like that's really what this is more than anything else. I Another shout out to this. I laughed so hard when he was so proudly talking about the device that he had and all that kind of stuff where he interrogates people. And Gene Smart scared, oh, it's a racist prover.
Yeah, he's like, well, that's a
That's an
oversimplification.
oversimplification. I'm like, oh no, it's a racist prover.
I liked everything
It
about them
was
talking
so
to each other.
good.
He's like, you know, that's not my name.
Oh my God.
Mirror guy.
Mirror guy. I was just like his mask looks so
Yeah,
cool.
I was because yeah, again, the trailer didn't do much. It was just like here are some visuals,
Mhm,
and so watching the show, it was really rewarding to be like that. Oh, that's what that means. Oh, and
mhm.
sometimes with that, you're like, oh, like that was just a cool shot. Versus
Yes.
Looking Glass, we're like, oh, this is just an amazing character. Like it looked
Mhm.
cool in the trailer, and then you're like, oh no, this is sick.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just the coolest thing. I thought that there was going to be more to that panda dispatch person because of the first scene, how it's like, oh yeah, you're real slow to buzz that gun out of the holster and all that kind of stuff. But no, really, he was just like, it was
I
literally,
think what that did for me as a
yeah.
black person was like,
Hmm.
uh, oh, you're again. There's a lot of things that happen like in real time that I find interesting. So like you're
Hmm.
watching, and you're like, oh, the white person's scared. Oh, like this is trying to show a universe where even white people are afraid of cops, and then it's like, no, what they're doing is showing you that wearing that cop suit doesn't protect you from being shot at a at a traffic stop.
Yep.
You like racism is that powerful that he
Yep.
will still come at you and kill you first before you have a chance to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the idea of like, oh yeah, that whole scene playing as, oh, he knows what to do. He knows how to put his hands on the wheel. He knows how to do all this kind of stuff. And yes, officer, and all he knows how to do that kind of stuff. It's a script for them. But at the end of the day, you're right. The racism prevails, and it's like, no, I'm just going to shoot you up, and then throw the lettuce because it's just like that's the argument too. It's like, well, why are you refusing a search if you have nothing to hide? He didn't
Mm-hmm.
have bombs there. He had lettuce, like you said he did. But the idea of like, no, screw you, I'm gonna shoot your ass, and all like, yep, racism is
Yeah,
that powerful.
I think that the not letting the gun out thing was just tension building, but it was just like
Yes.
overall, as I said, it doesn't give people outs the way
Hmm.
other things might.
Hmm.
Um, that it feels intentional that they were like, don't kid yourself into thinking that becoming a cop will erase the very real hate people have for your skin.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. It does nothing except, clearly identify that you're
Hmm.
a jerk. Just
Yeah,
put it lightly, to put it very, very lightly.
I mean,
Um,
best case scenario, you are woefully misguided in what you think you're doing.
oh,
That's
absolutely.
the best case scenario. There is
Yeah.
no scenario where I'm like, oh, good.
Yeah.
I could only be like, I guess they haven't found out yet that that's not gonna work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in willful ignorance being there to be like, oh yeah, this is I'm one of the good ones. No,
Yeah,
you're not. No, you're not.
no, I
You
mean, there's no such
support
thing
a
in a
crooked system.
institution like that. That is,
Nope.
they are not gonna let that slide.
Yeah.
Is it time to rate it, or did you have anything else to say? I'm sure we're missing stuff, but
The one last thing I will say is music. Trent
oh,
Reznor,
Russ,
Atticus Ross.
I wanted to
Boom.
point that I felt like
Spot
that would
on.
be an easy in for you as well.
Oh God, whenever I see Trent Reznor on the music thing now, I'm just like, here we go, baby. I'm taking a ride.
It's a good thing to see that. I feel like you're like, oh, okay, there's gonna be some good music here.
Oh yeah. And they did deliver.
Oh, they
They
delivered for sure.
delivered really, really well. Because that's the movie does the music very well too. Here, they do it even better. And I'm just like, this is great. So great.
Um, yeah, I'm glad you brought it up organically. I didn't want to be
Mhm.
like, hey, there's the Nine Inch Nails stuff.
Yeah,
Hey,
hey, hey, nudge, nudge. What'd you think of the music composer? Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it
Yep.
because I 2 whenever I see that he's gonna do a score, or sorry, the two of them are gonna do a score. I'm like, yeah, all right, I'm in.
Yep, it's great.
All right, let's rate this.
Yep.
I'm gonna give it a 10. I think that even my minor quibble is still attached to something I like, and this is the 3rd time I've rewatched it, and I feel like I'm gonna keep rewatching it. I really love the show.
Yeah, this series is a perfect 10 to me. I'm right there with you. There's everything about this. All my notes are like, did you like this? Did you like it? It's not like, oh, I hated how they do this. I just think the idea of like where they end up, where it's arguably pro cop, is just like, yeah, but that's because it's just the vast majority of the population is going to oversimplify that. Versus this discussion that you and I have had is just clearly, this is not in that sense. It just lands there of like, okay, yeah, yes, whatever. But it's just so nuanced, it's so complex, and I can't wait to rewatch this, dig into it with the knowledge I have. And again, very grateful that you're like, don't watch this before the other thing, because the hooded justice character, they do something really great here, and I'm like, ooh, okay, this is great. And I was like, wow, every layer of this, about how he can't be himself, from the gay thing to just being a black, to being a black superhero that has to cover up his eye makeup the reverse way, that to be like, oh, you have to,
and then he can't be a dad by the end of it.
Yeah,
like, so he has to give up his family.
It's wild. It's wildly good, and I'm just like, oh, this is just, it's such a beautiful piece of art. Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. 10, perfect 10.
All right. Well, I'm glad we both loved it. I was worried that it might not work as well for you because you don't, like, nothing wrong with it. You just didn't read the Watchmen comic. But
right.
I feel like that speaks to how well made the show is, that you still can enjoy it without having a strong connection to the comic.
Right.
Anyway, thank you very much for listening, everybody. If you want to hear older episodes, please go to tdfeverything.com/spoiledrotten. We're on all the podcast platforms. Rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, follow, do all that great stuff. If you want to get in touch with us, at TDFSpoiled on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads, and our email is spoiledpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you very much. And we'll be back. I guess we're going to do the Watchmen Chapter 1 movie now that we've talked about it so much, and that was always my plan. But yeah,
baby,
we'll be back. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
This has been a TDF Everything production, brah.